Okay, shalom and welcome to Beginning Biblical Hebrew. I'm Ross Nichols, for those of you who don't know me, and this is the first in a 5-part series on the basics of Biblical Hebrew. Turn my sound off. So my goal, first of all, let me state this in the outset. One of the things that I want to tell you is that my goal is to not make this a dry, boring grammar class, right? So that's the goal. That's the first and foremost. So I don't want you to get bored with it. But second of all, a secondary part of that goal, which goes hand in hand with that, is that I want to, in 5 weeks, 1 hour, every Thursday night for the next 5 Thursdays, my goal is to not only introduce you to the sounds of Biblical Hebrew and ultimately get you to the place where you can read Hebrew, but I want you to fall in love with Biblical Hebrew. And I think that I am successful in that. I think I'm trained to be successful in that anyway. So again, each Thursday night at 7 p.m., we will go live, 7 p.m. Central Standard Time, right here on the United Israel Facebook page. For those of you who successfully complete this course over the next 5 weeks, and I'll have certain ways to know if you were here each time, either online when it's live or that you went back and reviewed the material. I have my ways. If you successfully work through the next 5 weeks, you will get a certificate of completion, and I'll make sure that I sign those and send those out to you. Some of you might not feel that that's necessary, but it would be a good conversation starter. My goal is not only, as I said, to teach you the basics, but to get you to the place where you can actually read Biblical Hebrew. Now, upon the completion of this, we're already in the preparation phases for a next level. So there'll be other courses that are built on top of this. So I'm not just going to get you to the point where you can read and leave you on your own. The goal is to take this to the next level and continue to build on what we learn in this next 5 weeks. So let me start off by telling you that everyone is welcome. Over the next 5 weeks, I don't really care. I have 3 no's, basically. There is no requirement when it comes to your personal beliefs. In other words, I honestly don't care. I mean, that sounds sort of harsh, but I don't care where you're coming from theologically, because my goal is not to present theology to you. My goal is to give you tools whereby you can go in and read the text in its original, and you can formulate and validate some of your present beliefs. So don't worry about me leading you into a path and beliefs that you don't currently possess. And therefore, I would say that the second no is there's no proselytizing. So I won't be proselytizing you, and I would encourage you to think the same way. So this is not a forum, if you will, for people to share their personal beliefs and so forth. It's really about learning the language and falling in love with the language. The third no is that there's no charge. So I'm not charging anything for this. As an old saying I once heard, freely you have received, freely give. I was given this language as a gift by a very talented person, and I intend to pass that on to you using the same method. There's no charge. But having said that there's no charge, I should also let you know that there is a cost. Now, what do I mean by that? There's a cost in terms of time and dedication. Those who truly succeed in learning the Hebrew language are those who make an investment both in terms of their time and their dedication. The more that you invest in this, the more that you see in return. So I would encourage you to invest all that you can, put forward the necessary time and dedication, and I assure you that in no time at all you'll make suitable proficiency in the language. Since I did tell you that there's no charge, I would also add that I didn't require the purchase of any grammar book. We're going to talk a little bit about this in a few minutes, because you think, how could I possibly learn without a grammar book? I did make a recommendation, but we'll talk about that as well. So just to make this available, this opportunity available to the greatest audience, I've not required any purchase, any money, and I think that that's the right way to do this. And there's several reasons for that. The first is that there are a lot of Hebrew grammars out there. You can see on my desk in front of me, there are quite a few here. I don't know how many I have here, 7 or 8. I have others in my study. And each of these are presented according to the way that this particular grammarian thinks that it's easiest to learn, or at least that's the way they're presented. I'm not sure that they really believe that, but each of these claims to possess the right material to bring you to a place where you can work functionally inside the language. So since there's so many out there, I would like to add that many of these are very difficult to work through in terms of not having a teacher right there at your side. Some of these are designed and work very well in a classroom setting, but quite honestly, most of them are difficult to work through if you don't have someone giving you the class. And I wanted to start to make that point a little bit clearer. This happens to be a quote to drill that point home from Biblical Hebrew, a text and workbook. This is put out by Yale, and the authors are Kittle, Hoffer, and Wright. And this quote I thought was illustrative of my point. It says that a good Hebrew grammar for students beginning the study is still a desideratum. Our writers of Hebrew grammars have aimed to write for scholars rather than for students. They've been ambitious on most points to say all that could be said without studying to say only that which is needful to be said. In other words, you can look through all these grammars, and quite often what you'll find is that they're written at a level that most of us find hard to attain. So what I've tried to do is, over the years of my personal study, is to be able to say what is needed to be said in order to get you to the place where you can work in the language, and nothing more than that. So rather than showing someone every detail, every nuance of the language, I tried to distill that down into what's necessary in order to teach you the basics. So as I said, this grammar is the one that I do recommend if you have the ability and you have the means to purchase a grammar for beginners. I would highly recommend this one. It's called Biblical Hebrew, an Introductory Grammar by Paige Kelly. It works very quickly to get the student into the text of the Hebrew Bible and not another work. And the lessons and examples are all geared towards that goal. So I've posted in our Facebook group for the Introduction to Biblical Hebrew a link to Amazon, and you can purchase these at a very reasonable price. You can also get them used, which I would encourage if you don't have the funds to buy a new book. Quite often, it's like exercise equipment. People will buy the best of the best of the best in exercise equipment and then not use it. They use it, some of you have done this. I know you have. So it's the same with grammar books. So if you can purchase one, this is the one that I recommend. But for this course, since our goal is to only get you to a point where you are able to read the words, I will be supplying the materials at no cost or no charge to you. They're available in a couple of places. The things that I will want you to use to study, to learn with me, are found on the Facebook group page, and I'll post that link later, or someone else who is a faithful student and a good friend might post that for me, to the Facebook group for Introductory Biblical Hebrew. And they're also available on our website at unitedisrael.org. And the two documents that I'll primarily be using are the Aleph Beit chart. You'll see this in both of those places, both on our website as well as the Facebook page. And then one that's called Vowel Sounds chart. So you can imagine that if you have the letters, the consonants, and the vowel sounds, you'll pretty much have what you need to complete this course. I would also like to remind those of you who have not already done so to sign up on the Facebook group page, because that's going to be a great place to interact with other students. So we're going to have discussions. I'll be posting questions and polls and things like that to see if you are actually paying attention in class. And part of what I'm thinking about doing when I offer to provide a certificate of completion is I will actually have certain questions that I'll say you have to at least go on the page and like it. So you won't just be able to ride the pine, as we used to say. You'll actually have to be engaged and participate in this. Now, one other thing that I wanted to tell you is that I will be posting some vocabulary words. What is school without vocabulary? So by the end of this 5 weeks, I will be introducing you to 64 Hebrew words. That's my goal. And why 64? Because I wanted to include every word that occurs in the Hebrew Bible. If there are Christians out there, I'm referring to the Old Testament. For those who recognize the term Hebrew Bible, I'm referring to those specific documents that make up the Christian Old Testament, the Tanakh. But the 64 words that I'll be introducing you to, occur with a frequency of 500 times or greater. Now, I have vocabulary sheets that, again, I've made when I was studying this originally years ago, and I've uploaded them to my site as well on unitedisrael.org. And that particular site, there is a page that I call Hebrew Language Helps. This will be posted on our Facebook group page. And there you'll find not only the Aleph Beit chart, you'll find the vowel sounds chart. You'll also find all of the vocabularies, or the vocabulary list, governing the words that occur all the way. It's basically the top 1,000 most frequently used words in the Hebrew Bible. If you learn to read and you learn these vocabulary words, you are well on your way to picking up a Hebrew Bible and reading the Bible in the original language. So I'm excited to get us to that point, as you can imagine. By the end of this course, we'll be using these frequently used words for examples and in exercises, and you will hear me say this: practice, practice, practice. A lot of memorization. There are some rules, but I'll keep those to a minimum in this first 5-week course. Now, let me tell you this. Everyone take a deep breath and hear me when I tell you, by way of encouragement, you can do this. You really can do this. I have seen many people become discouraged and give up, but it's like exercise. Again, I'll use the analogy. It often helps us if we have someone alongside that can encourage us, to get us up off our tail and to really get into this and study. So I'm going to be your personal trainer, not because I'm the best at it, but because I'm the most passionate that you've ever met, hopefully. I'll try to convey that. Now, there's one other reason, because I'm a Bible guy, there's one other reason that I'm so excited about teaching this particular course. And it comes to us from one of the prophets in the Hebrew Bible, and the prophet is Zephaniah. Now, how long has it been since you read the prophet Zephaniah? If you go to Zephaniah, I want to read one passage, and I want to tell you why it's so important that you begin now to learn the Hebrew language. You're getting a head start on something quite prophetic. In Zephaniah chapter 3, verse 9, it says the following. Now, this is an English translation. It says, "Yes, at that time I will change the speech of the peoples to a pure speech, that all of them may call upon the name of the Lord and serve Him with one accord." So think about it. What this is saying in Zephaniah 3:9 is that ultimately all of humanity will be converted to a pure language, a single lip. I believe that that language is Hebrew. I believe that throughout this course I'll make examples and hopefully convince you of the same. But if you think about it, all the way back in Genesis chapter 11, some of you have heard a story about the Tower of Babel. In the story of the Tower of Babel, all of humanity, the languages were confused. At once they spoke one language. They were of a single lip, if you will, one language, and that was confused. Zephaniah 3:9 speaks of a day when that will be reversed. So it's a reversing of the curse, so you are getting a head start on that, and you ought to be excited about that. Now, if you're ready, I don't have a time set for these classes. They'll work out to about an hour. And again, once I complete the recording of these on Facebook, they'll be posted on our website, and I'll share that link as well, so that you can go back, and I encourage you to do this, you can go back and watch these again and again. Not because you'll love watching me that much, but you'll at least get the instruction and you'll be able to go through it if you need a refresher. Because repetition brings it to the forefront of your memory, and that's our goal. Now, as we begin, I'll say this. There are 3 constituent parts that are required to learn any language. All right, and in order, this doesn't matter what language, so think about it. You have to learn to articulate sounds represented by characters. So you have to learn an alphabet. In Hebrew, we refer to the Hebrew alphabet as the Aleph Beit. See, you're already learning. The Aleph Beit are the first 2 names of the languages, or the names of the first 2 Hebrew letters, the Aleph Beit. Once you can articulate sounds represented by letters, you'll learn to unite these letters and sounds into syllables, and then ultimately you'll work these into words and sentences. Now I can tell you in this course over the next 5 weeks, you'll be focused on sounds and syllables and the initial formation of words. We're not going to get to the point in this first 5 weeks to where we're going to be building sentences, so to speak, but we will be building words, and you'll be well on your way to reading and saying these Hebrew words. Now, I should tell you this. You know more than you think you know already. I'll give you a couple of examples. There are plenty of names, place names, in the Hebrew Bible, and names of people that you're very familiar with that are actually Hebrew names and words. So, for instance, how many of you have ever heard someone say Amen or Amen? We'll prove which pronunciation is right. I like to joke with people. In a good Southern Baptist church in the United States where I grew up, the best prayer always ended with that deep-voiced man, usually a deacon, who would say, Amen. Then there were others who prayed and said the word Amen. You'll actually learn how to pronounce that word. Not that that's one of the crowning achievements of the course, but you'll at least be able to say you got that. You'll be able to win a trivia contest, if you will. Other words that you're familiar with in praise, hallelujah, hallelujah. What does that mean? We're going to talk about that. The name David, in Hebrew, David. So what I'm going to do is, as I begin to teach you how to sound out Hebrew words, some of you already know this, this will be a refresher for you, but as I begin to show you how to do this, I'm going to use examples of words that you're already familiar with so that as you sound it out, and I love it when this happens, someone will actually see the word, they won't know what it is until they sound it out, and I get to watch the light bulb go off. So as I look around the room when this happens, I've done this before, and people get excited because they're actually reading a word in Hebrew and they recognize it. Bethlehem. How is that actually pronounced? How about this one? Growing up in a Christian environment, I used to talk about this high priest name. We called him Melchizedek. There's actually a more Hebraically accurate way to pronounce that. You'll learn that. This will very much help you in terms of those passages in the Bible when you read that have so many of these names. I mean, you know, you have to read some of those lists of begots and begets. This is going to help you pronounce those names correctly, and you'll amaze all your friends, I assure you. We will be using, for your notes, the Sephardic pronunciation. You'll see in some books, or you'll read online, of Ashkenazi or Sephardi. We're going to be going with the Sephardic pronunciation. So make sure that you are ready for some of these notes that I'm going to give you, because I might throw a pop quiz on you next week, Sherry. Need to be ready for that. So, without further ado, we will jump into a study of the Hebrew Aleph Beit. The Hebrew Aleph Beit. Now, I'm holding up a chart. You don't have to see it closely because it's available online in the Facebook group. Those who are here with us in person have a copy of this in front of you. If you didn't pick one up, there's some right here on the front table. For those of you who are watching online, I encourage you to go ahead and get that while I'm talking, because I'll be going through this and I'll be referring to certain columns, and I want you to keep up with me so that you can follow along. I thought I heard my voice. That's okay. It's all right. That proves that I'm not alone in this room.
I don't even know how I did that.
Did you get it? Okay, that sounded great. I'll make sure the sound goes through. So in this class, using the Hebrew letters chart, I'll be going through the names, the forms, and the English approximation. Now, I promise you that these classes will be engaging and interesting. However, there are portions of it where it will seem a bit dry because we have to go through some of this material, but I need you to go through it with me so that you pronounce the names and so forth correctly, and you're going to have to go through some of that. But again, you can go back and watch these at a later point. So I'll be basically covering three things in this class. The names of the Hebrew letters. I'll be covering the forms. So you're going to see these. Now I'll show you. I have these wonderful, bold vocabulary. No, they're not vocabulary. They're actually the Hebrew Aleph Beit, the letters. And I have these flashcards that are 8.5 by 11. If you want to get these, if you need them this large, perhaps you're visually impaired, you can get these from Amazon. I can post the link to that as well. But these will actually be used during the instruction throughout the course. So I think this is very easily visible online. As I begin to form syllables and words, I'll use them on the whiteboard like this so that it's easy to pick up from the internet audience. So these are the cards I'll be using. We're going to go through each of these letters in just a few moments. So I'll be going through the names of the letters, the forms, and the English approximation. In other words, what sound does this letter make? So let me explain. And if this is very simple for you, that's great. If you need the extra, I hope to give it to you. If I were to write in English this letter, you would know that this is the letter B. Can you see that? Okay. Now, that's the name and form. This is the form. The name is the letter B, and the English approximation is B. It makes a B sound. So that's what I mean when I use those three terms. I don't mean to talk to you like a school child, but many of us are school children when it comes to Hebrew. So please don't be offended. I want to explain my terms. So you have a name of a letter, you have a form of a letter, and then you have an English approximation. What I mean by approximation, again, is the sound that it makes. These are not absolute equivalents, as you'll see as we work through, but it puts us in a way that English speakers can understand this. Your assignment over the next week is to learn what I teach you tonight and be ready to build on that when it comes time for next week's class. Hello, hello. Welcome.
I've been lost.
Oh, man, I hate that you were lost. Well, welcome. You're not lost any longer.
That's right.
if you can grab one of these forms right here on the front, you are welcome to, there you go, and sit wherever you find a seat, whatever makes you comfortable. So again, your assignment this week will be to learn the names and forms of these letters and be able to recognize them and pronounce the sound that they make. Now, it may seem to be a daunting task, but I would like to tell you, again, to breathe deeply, don't be overwhelmed and don't be intimidated. The reason that I set up this interactive page is so that you can ask questions and receive answers, and you'll have me and others there to hold your hand and guide you through the process. Here are some tips to making sure that you achieve a proficiency level that's suitable to move on over the next 5 weeks. Watch the video. If you need to watch it again, watch it again. Make yourself flashcards. You'll be able to use my chart, and you'll be able to take that chart and use it to make your own flashcards. And then review those flashcards over and over and over so that you get it. And that's all it takes. It's like any other course that you take. The more you study, the more you practice, the better and easier it becomes for you. And then there are some apps I would like to point out that if you have a smart device, you can download certain devices or certain apps on your device. You can just simply go in and search for Hebrew letters, and you can download those on your smart device. Those are quite helpful as well. Now, a few facts about the Hebrew alphabet. A few facts that I just want to cover before we get into going through the actual letters. Originally, the earlier form of the Hebrew letters originally represented objects. So you know about Egyptian hieroglyphs and a character representing a picture or an object. Hebrew, anciently, most scholars agree that it was originally, the letters actually represented an object. And we'll cover some of those throughout the course. But for now, just understand that that's the case. The present form of the letters is called the square character or the Aramaic character. Now, this particular character came into use about the 4th to the 3rd century BCE, before the Common Era. So we're talking about quite a long time ago, the form that we presently use came into popular use. And so the present form doesn't really, in many cases, look very much at all like the original objects that the names of the letters represented in an earlier period. A couple other things. There are certain characters, certain letters that possess characteristics, if you will, that put them in certain categories that are just going to have to be memorized. And we'll talk about that as we go through the chart. You'll just simply have to remember that 5 of the letters have a form that's used in the middle of the word or the beginning of the word, but anytime that letter is used at the end of a word, that letter looks a little bit differently. We're going to show you those on the dry erase board here in a moment so it makes more sense. Some letters in Hebrew make similar sounds. Don't be nervous about that, because in English we do it as well. Sometimes the letter C, for instance, has an S sound, as in the word face. Sometimes the C has a harder sound, like in the word cat. You'll be able to discern what it is that you're looking at by observation. There's some rules that we'll cover. Makes that pretty easy to understand, so don't get worried about that. And so those are some of the basics. Now, how about some good news? How about this? There are no capital letters in Hebrew. There you go. So I'm going to give you something that's going to benefit you. If you learn the English alphabet, you have 26 characters, and they each have a capital or an uppercase and a lowercase. Hebrew doesn't have that, so don't worry about that. In fact, it's so much easier to learn Hebrew because you don't have 26 letters to learn. you have 22 letters to learn. So that's the good news. I'm already giving you a break. It's so much easier than English. And we'll see as we progress through this. Now, I wanted to take some time before I get into the actual letters to cover something that I think is quite interesting, and that is that 22, the number 22. So I just told you that there are 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet. 22 Hebrew letters. Now, what is significant about 22? This is the kind of stuff I'll throw in to break it up so it's not all boring grammar. In the ancient world, according to several sources which I will cover briefly, 22, the number 22, came to be associated with completion. Now, I'll cover a couple of these examples to make this point. I'll tell you, for instance, that among the scrolls that were discovered at Qumran, you've heard of the Dead Sea Scrolls, when they discovered this cache of documents at Qumran, one of the things that was discovered were, there are actually more than one copy, but fragments of what is known as the Book of Jubilees. The Book of Jubilees dates back to a period approximately 150 before the Common Era. And one of the things that it says in there, to make this point about 22 being significant, is it says that if you count the number of things that were part of the creation, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, and you go through and you counted those, it says that there are 22 acts of creation, and this is recorded in the Book of Jubilees. There are 22, according to the Book of Jubilees, 22 generations from Adam to Jacob, right? And there are 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, and it also includes this interesting point. There are 22 books, or sefer, 22 scrolls associated with the Hebrew Bible. Now, let me make that point, because if you are any knowledgeable student of the Bible, and I've told you that the Hebrew Bible is equivalent to what Christians refer to as the Old Testament. How many books are in the Old Testament? 39. There are 39 books in the Christian Old Testament. There are 24 books according to the Jewish Bible. But anciently, this same literature, arranged differently, consisted of 22 books. Now, how do you get from 39 or 24 to 22? Very simply. For instance, what we refer to in certain circles as the minor prophets, Hosea, Joel, Amos, Nahum, Micah, those 12, they were originally one scroll. So if you think about it, that reduces our number from 39 to 27 right there. And there are other books which are combined. Ezra and Nehemiah were originally one scroll and so forth. So let me make this point by going through a couple of the sources. Now this actual quote is from, the writer Origen. You've heard of him in 210 CE, the Common Era. He said, it should be stated that the canonical books, those that have been accepted into the canon, as the Hebrews have handed them down, are 22, corresponding with the number of their letters. Hilary of Poitiers, 360 of the Common Era, says, the law of the Old Testament is considered as divided into 22 books so as to correspond to the number of the letters. I want to make sure you get this point. I want to drill this home. Athanasius in 365 says, there are then of the Old Testament 22 books in number. This is the number of the letters among the Hebrews. Gregory of Nazianzus, 390. I have exhibited 22 books corresponding with the 22 letters of the Hebrews. A couple more. Jerome in 410, the great church father as he's called, although some of his actions weren't that great, I hate to tell you. 410, he says this: the Hebrews have 22 letters is testified as there are 22 elementary characters by which we write in Hebrew all we say. So we reckon 22 books by which a righteous man is instructed. And there are quite a few other examples. The point is that 22 represented in antiquity this idea of completion. And so when I think about 22 letters, and I've already given you a break, you don't have 26 letters like you would if you were studying English, but you have 22 characters in the Hebrew language. Much easier, much easier. Now, a couple other things to bring up at this point. There are certain psalms, and those psalms are Psalm 37, Psalm 111, Psalm 112, and Psalm 119, which are what we call acrostic psalms. Acrostic. Now, I'll use Psalm 119 for example. Many of you know that Psalm 119 is the longest chapter in the Bible. Psalm 119, the longest chapter. Now, Psalm 119 is actually composed of 22 sections with 8 stanzas each. And the first stanza, the first section, has 8 stanzas, each of which begin with the letter Aleph. So each of the words, this is the letter Aleph. See, you're already learning, Aleph. In Psalm 119, the first 8 verses, if you will, the first word in each of those verses begins with this particular letter, with the Aleph. The next 8 begin with the next letter, and so on and so forth, so that by the time you read through Psalm 119, you're exposed to this beautiful, not only poetry, and not only wonderfully worded, but it's got this artistic appeal to the eye. Now, one of your assignments, just for fun, in your spare time, aside from learning a foreign language, is to go read Psalm 119 this week. Read it, study it, take it in. And I will tell you this, that even in many English translations, even in Christian Bibles, and say the King James Version in many editions, you'll see not only the Hebrew letter, the form of the letter, but you'll see the name of the letter as well at the beginning of each of these 22 sections. So beginning in verse 1, quite often if you open up an English Bible to Psalm 119, you'll see Aleph. And you'll see a picture of the Aleph, and then the first 8 verses will each, in English it doesn't show up so well. This is why you have to learn Hebrew to see how beautiful it really is. Actually, I'll post a photo of that later so you can get an example of that. Beginning before verse 9 in Psalm 119, you'll see the Hebrew letter Bet, and then you'll work through so forth and so on, completing the entirety of that psalm. Okay, so now we are going to begin looking at this chart, and I want you to work through this with me. I just want to kind of tell you a little bit about what you're looking at here. Some of the things on this chart will be important for your study this week. Other elements that are included on the chart are for your own personal benefit, and they won't come in until a later class. But if you look at this chart, the Hebrew letters is going to be the heading. You'll see on the left-hand column, it says the Hebrew name. Now, some of you who might be a little bit further advanced can already read the names of those letters. But this is actually the name of the letter in Hebrew characters with the Hebrew vowel sounds. So this is how you know that you're pronouncing them correctly. A lot of times when people begin to study Hebrew, they might say a letter incorrectly. Like I'll hear someone, now believe me, I'm speaking Hebrew with a southern Louisiana accent. So I can assure you that a native Israeli might listen to me and say, well, that's not precise either. But I'll just tell you in advance that based on the sounds of the characters and the vowel sounds, I can tell you that it's not Aleph, but it's Aleph. Okay? And so sometimes when people begin to study, they don't know that, but this is how we can check that. So column number 2 is the names of the letters written out in English characters. Now, what does that mean? Someone is messaging me asking, can you provide us with the chart? The chart is actually on the Facebook group page. So if you look in my original link, you'll see the chart is, that link to the Facebook page is on that page, and it's also on our website, unitedisrael.org. It's listed on a page called Hebrew Helps, and maybe someone can help me and post the link to that where people can get access to this form. So the names of the Hebrew letters in English characters. Here is a term that you'll need to be familiar with. Whenever I take a Hebrew word and I write it in English characters, that's called transliterate. Transliterate. So the word, the name, or the actual term Adam in the early chapters of Genesis is written in English as A-D-A-M. Everyone knows that. Now, in Hebrew, it doesn't look like this. In Hebrew, we'll show you that in a later class, so I don't want to confuse you. There are 3 letters that make up the Hebrew word for Adam. And this is called transliterate when I take Hebrew characters and I put into English what the Hebrew represents. It's the same with the word Amen. Amen is a Hebrew word that is biblically represented by Hebrew characters, but when we bring it into English, we spell it with English letters. That's called transliteration. So whenever you see the names of the letters, this is the English representation of what is immediately to the left of it in the first column called Hebrew name. The next column is called form. Now, don't get nervous, don't get confused. I told you there are 22 characters. If some of you are jumping ahead and you're counting all the characters, you're saying, you lied to me, Ross. There are more than 22 characters. I wouldn't call that a lie. I would call it comforting the learner. There are certain things about the letters that are covered on this chart. You'll see that in a few moments. But these are the forms of the letters. This is the way that these letters occur in printed form. The next column is English approximation. What that is for is to tell you the sound that is made by that particular character. So for instance, if you look in column number 2, you'll see the name Aleph. The next column, you'll see the form. You'll recognize that soon enough as the Hebrew letter Aleph. And then the English approximation. This is getting harder all the time, isn't it? What does it say? None. There's no real equivalent. It's going to be okay. It's one less that you have to learn right now, right? Think positively. Now, once we get through that, there are 4 other columns. You'll see the first column with blue in it called Beged Kafat. Don't worry about what that means yet. It comes later in the grammar process. For now, you'll just notice that there are 6 Hebrew letters which are designated specially as Beged Kafat letters. That's all you need to know right now. The next column is guttural. There are 5 Hebrew letters, 4 that are always considered guttural letters, and 1 that sometimes is considered a guttural. And then you'll see that there are also 5 Hebrew letters that have a final form. Now, easy enough? Everybody on the same page? You're at least on the same page, whether you understand it or not. That's a different question altogether. But we're going to begin a review of the Hebrew letters at this point with my fancy Hebrew cards. I love these. one of the things that I was concerned about was being able to present these so that the learner could see them clearly on the screen. I think I've achieved, if I can get it straight, right? Maybe I could do it like this, all right? So this, we're going to go through these, and I'm going to cover, and you can look at your chart and then look at what I'm holding. This is necessary. So I want you to go through these. You might have to watch this part of the video a few times to really nail this down. This is the Hebrew letter Aleph. Aleph. You can say this out loud with me. You can say it to yourself. I don't need you to if you don't want to. But the Hebrew name is Aleph. This is the form that it occurs in. If you'll notice on your chart, the English approximation, there is none. Okay? Now, you will be able to pronounce it based upon certain markings that occur under it, above it, but that comes next week. So for the present, Aleph. Aleph. No English approximation. All right? Now, here we go. I'm going to show you a letter. This is the Hebrew letter Beit. Beit. And you'll see how I'm pronouncing these, and you'll be able to hear this. You'll notice in this letter, there's a dot. All right? This dot is called a dagesh. A dagesh. You can just put this in your notes. It occurs later in our grammar process. Dagesh in Hebrew means a piercing. It's a dot that has a couple of functions in a letter, but for now, you're just going to learn a few of these reasons. If it occurs in a beit, you will pronounce this, the English approximation is B, as in boy, or in Beit Lechem, Bethlehem. This is a hard consonant. It's a B. So this is the beit. It's got a dagesh in it. It's pronounced as B. The next thing I want to show you, not to create confusion, look at your chart. You'll notice that I showed, I'm going to put them side by side. You'll notice that both of these technically are the letter Beit. Some grammars will call this one, there we go, I was backwards. Some will call this a vet because it's pronounced as a V, and this as a beit because it's got the dagesh. Don't confuse yourself. This is the letter beit. With the dagesh, it's pronounced as a B. Without, it's pronounced as a V. Got it? Clear as mud? Next Hebrew letter. Look at your chart. You'll see this letter is called Gimel. Gimel. It has an English approximation of G, the letter G. Everyone following along on the chart? All right. Next letter. Dalet. Dalet. All right. It has an English approximation of D. You see that on the chart? Next letter. Hey. Hey. Just like hey. Like hey. All right. It has an English approximation of H. H. As in heaven or heavenly. All right. This particular letter, if you look at your chart, it has two names whereby it is known. And this, we'll probably talk a little bit about this because so many people argue tooth and nail over the correct pronunciation of God's name. If you've ever been around the religious groups long enough, you'll meet with these people who fight and condemn one group or another based on the pronunciation of the name. This is the Hebrew letter Vav. Vav. Notice I called it a Vav. This is a Sephardic. Now, some grammars and many grammarians will tell you that anciently this was called a Wal, and it was pronounced as a W when it was used as a consonant. For the purposes of this class, please stick with me on this. Let's call this a Vav. All right, it has an English approximation of V. Sometimes people will say W. That's why I included both. So I didn't mean to confuse. It was to be inclusive. This Hebrew letter is called Zayin. Zayin. All right, it has an English approximation of Z. Z. All right. Next letter is the Chet. Chet. It's a little bit harder to pronounce for English speakers. It's sort of, at some places, now I'll tell you, when native Israelis speak, it's less guttural by most. If I hear it spoken when I'm in Israel, it's almost like a hard H. It's not as, like some people when they learn Hebrew, they kind of hack this one up. It's not quite that harsh, but it sounds that harsh when people in Louisiana are learning it. So it's a Chet, but it is pronounced in some ways when you see it in a word as a CH, as in loch, like the Loch Ness Monster. All right, some of you know this. All right, next letter is the letter Tet. It has the sound or the English approximation of T. T. Tet. All right, next letter, Yod. All right, this particular letter has an English approximation of Y. Y. Now remember, I'm presenting only 22 consonants. Talk about vowels and vowel letters and all the tricky stuff later. Just remember for this point. Now, here we go. If you look at your chart, you'll see that I have 3 listed side by side as Kaf. Okay? You see, this is exactly what your chart shows. Now I'm going to explain these to you. Again, notice it has a dot in the middle. It can take a dot. So what is the dot called? Anybody remember? A dagesh. That's right. It's a piercing. When you see it in this particular letter, in the Kaf, it gives it a hard sound, more like a K, a Kaf. When you see the letter without the dagesh, it's pronounced more of that guttural sound, ch, ch. So it's a K. This is more of a CH. All right, both of these are called the letter Kaf, as is this. Now this is the final form. So anytime that the Kaf occurs at the end of a word, you'll see it as the final form. Now let me put these side by side so I can explain the medial and final form. If you notice, this letter is similar, except that instead of curving, it drops down. So it's like on the final forms, except one exception, the final form just elongates that leg. So if you stretch this out and extended it down. So this notifies us that when this letter is used at the end of a word, you'll see the final Kaf. Make sense? Okay. So you have the medial form and the final form. All right. Next letter is the Hebrew letter Lamed. Lamed, and this you'll see in your chart is an English approximation of L. Makes the L sound. All right, Lamed. Now, look at your chart. You'll see the letter Mem. Notice we have 2 different characters for Mem. See how I have it shown in this particular chart? You'll see the medial form and the final form. The final form, like in the other case, extends the leg so that it closes it up. You see that? That's the way you tell them apart. Medial form, final form. Mem. All right. Nun. Hebrew letter nun. You'll see that it also has a final form. Medial form. The extended form is the final form. If you see a nun at the end of a word, it will have the extension on it. It's just stretched out longer. All right, so that case works for us in that as well as the kaf. All right, so now the Hebrew letter samek. Now, I'll show you this as we work through various things. These look a little bit alike, don't they? I'm going to drill you on these so you'll get used to this. This is a mem that ends the word. This is a final mem. It looks a lot like a samek when you first begin. But don't be so worried about that, because you'll see these enough that you'll be able to recognize the difference. And I tell people, when you learn English, there are some letters that look similar to us in English as well, right? So you can think about how many kids, if you've ever had children, or I guess you've been a child, all of you, but if you've ever had children, sometimes they confuse P and D. You know, sometimes that's something that, you know, it looks kind of, when you first start, but now most people know the difference after they've studied it a while. So don't get too nervous. You're going to study these for hours and hours this week when you're normally would be watching some silly show on television. All right. Samek. English approximation S. Next letter. Hebrew letter ayin. Ayin. All right, now what's the English approximation for ayin? There is none. It'll be supplied, if it's to be pronounced, by things we'll learn next week. Ayin. All right. Okay, here's another one with 3 characters that you'll have to learn. This is the Hebrew letter pei. All right. Notice that one has a dot in it that's called a dagesh. All right, dagesh means piercing. If you see it with the dagesh, it's pronounced with a hard sound. It's pronounced as a P. All of these are referred to as the letter pei. P sound. If it doesn't have a dagesh in it, it's pronounced with an F. So it would have an F as an English approximation. All right, and then this is your final character. Your final form for a letter pei. All right. Sade. Sade. This is the medial form. If the letter sade occurs in the beginning or middle of a word, you'll see it like this. If it occurs at the end, notice our rule that works with only one exception. Notice that if you extended this, it would look like this. Sadi. Medial form, final form. And it has an English approximation of TS. All right, TS as in the word nets. Nets. In Hebrew, there's a word tzaddik. Tzaddik means righteous or a righteous one. That's the letter that begins the word tzaddik. All right. Hebrew letter kof. Kof. All right. It has an English approximation. If you'll look at your chart, you'll find it. It has a K sound. Kof. Hebrew letter resh. Resh. Look at the English approximation R. All right. You see the R? And here we have the Hebrew letter sheen. All right. Now, if you have the dot on this side, you'll have to memorize this. It represents an SH. If you see this, over the right-hand branch, it represents SH. If it's over the left-hand branch, it represents an S sound. Some grammars will present this as two different letters. It's sheen. Sometimes pronounced sheen, sometimes pronounced seen. All right, you'll get these. We have the Hebrew letter Tav. Notice that it has a dagesh in it. There's really no distinct difference in pronunciation as I'm teaching you between this particular letter with or without the dagesh. We'll be pronouncing both of these as the Hebrew letter Tav with a T sound. Now, I will tell you, some of you who are familiar with Judaism, or if you've been around some Jewish people, certain sects will say this, you'll hear people say Shabbos. All right? Now, where do they get that? Because the word Shabbos, as they pronounce it, is spelled in Hebrew Shabbat with a T sound. But certain sects of Judaism, if they have the Tav with the dagesh, they pronounce it as the T. Without the dagesh, they pronounce it as an S. So in the word Shabbos, that's the reason they pronounce it like that. Okay, now, I think everyone is sufficiently ready to go through these, and we have gone for almost an hour, so I want to cover real quickly what I want you to go through over the next 6-7 days before our next class. All I wanted to do today was to introduce the Hebrew alphabet to you, and we'll go through these one more time as a group before you leave. But I wanted to cover your homework assignments. You didn't think you could participate without some homework, did you? Here's what I want you to do. I want you to review this chart. I want you to learn, like thoroughly learn the Hebrew letters this week. And you'll be able to do this if you apply yourself, and you have to do it in order to keep up with us. So we're going to go through these. So you want to review the letters. You need to know the names. Look at your chart. The names of the Hebrew letters. You have to be able to recognize the form of each Hebrew letter. And you have to know the English approximation. So how will you do that? One recommendation is to write your Hebrew letters. A lot of these grammar books will teach you script and form and block. So in a sense, you're just getting, I want you to do as best you can to draw them as they are on the chart, okay? So this is going to be, you're basically trying to replicate the printed form of the Hebrew letters. I'd like you to do that 10 times each. I won't have you turn that in. I don't want to clutter my inbox, otherwise I would. But I'll be able to know if you did it, so I'll be able to test you on that. So you're going to work on that. You're going to write those 10 times a piece. So if you want to go through various practices and join up on the Facebook page, the group page, I think this is going to be beneficial. So let's go through these together one time so that you are familiar and you can hear the names pronounced. This is the Hebrew letter Aleph. It has no English approximation. Aleph. This is the Hebrew letter Beit. All right. Without the dagesh, the English approximation is V. V. With the dagesh, it's pronounced B, as a B. Next letter is called the Gimel. Gimel. It has an English approximation of G. Next is the Dalet. The Dalet English approximation of D. D as in door. Hey. English approximation of H. Hey. Vav. On your chart, I did include that it is in some grammars referred to as the Wa, as a W. For the purpose of this class, we're calling it a Vav with an English approximation of V. Puts us all on the same page. Zion, English approximation of Z. Z. Het, English approximation of, see it on my paper, CH or a heavy H. These will make sense as you see them in words with which you're familiar, and I promise you that will happen. Next is Tate, has an English approximation of T. Yod, English approximation of Y. And now we're to our Kaf. You'll notice that here we have a dagesh in it. You'll see it has three forms on your chart. This is pronounced as a K. This is more a CH sound. And this is your final form. You'll see those on your chart. Lamed. Lamed, English approximation of L. Mem. This is the medial form. If the letter occurs at the beginning or the middle of the word, you'll see this character. If it occurs at the end of the word, you'll see it in this form. The Mem. The Nun, English approximation of N. Medial form at the beginning or middle of a word. Final form at the end of the word. Nun. Next, Samek. Don't get this confused with the final Mem. It looks like it, but look at your chart. Make you some keep calling them vocab. I'm ready to get you into vocabulary. Write out some cards, some index cards with the Hebrew letters on them, and look at these side by side. Samek is more round. All right, so think of a way to memorize that. Remember that. All right, next we have the ayin, no English approximation. So we have two letters with no English approximation, the aleph and the ayin. Next is the letter pei. According to the chart, we have three forms. The one with the dagesh, the dot in the middle, is called, it's an English approximation of P. Without the dagesh, F, and then the final form. It's called a pei safet, the ending form. All right? We have the Hebrew letter tzadeh. Tzadeh. It has the English approximation of TS, as in nets or let's, and then the final form for the tzadi. Notice again that the tzadi in the medial form, if you extended the lower leg, it would be the final form. Easy way to recognize that. Kof, English approximation of K. Resh, all right, English approximation of R. Now, this is a sheen. If it has the dot over the left-hand branch, it's pronounced as an S. If it has the dot over the right-hand branch, it's pronounced as a SH. Sheen. All right. And then we have the Hebrew letter Tav. And I told you for the purpose of my class, regardless of whether you see it with or without the dagesh, the piercing in the middle, you'll pronounce this as the Hebrew letter Tav, as a T sound. Now, a couple of things just to call your attention to. I'm not concerned with, some of you are going to want to get ahead, and I am fine with that. I'm not worried at all about that. Run along. I'm going at a certain pace because I want to make sure that everyone is able to, at the end of 5 weeks, read Biblical Hebrew. You'll be at a beginner stage, but you'll be able to read it. A money-back guarantee, right? Because you didn't pay anything, so if you... It's free is free, right? No, but you will invest some time, as I pointed out. But I want you to feel free if you want to order the book. I have posted this on the page so that some of you who are fast learners can jump ahead. because over the next several weeks, months, hopefully years and decades, I'll be happy to bring us further into Hebrew grammar so that we can develop our skills and get better and better at the Hebrew language. So next week, we're going to actually begin to go over this second chart. We'll start the class next week with a rehearsal or a review of what we did this week, and we'll do some practice. And then we'll pick up the second class right after our review with a study of the vowel sounds. Now, I have some good news for you. After you learn the Hebrew letters and the vowel sounds, you're going to be able to make syllables and you'll be able to read. It's very simple to do. There's a lot of memorization. There's a lot of making sure that you don't get confused or, with similar looking, sounding letters, but it's doable. It's very doable. I've actually taught this very class in a setting that was not using the internet. Makes it a little bit more difficult. But those who were with us in the classroom were able to actually sound out Hebrew words at the end of our course. So I want to put that challenge before you and let you know that a lot of people were worried that they wouldn't be able to do it. Some think they're too old to whatever, they've been out of school too long. I promise you none of that is in any way going to keep you from learning the Hebrew language. So, if you will take the time this week to study the Hebrew letters, learn according to the chart, the name, the form, and the English approximation, I would encourage you along the way to let you know that you will be ready for class number 2. Again, I'm going to post up a couple of the links on the Facebook page. Did someone post the link to the Facebook group page on here, or do you know? Does anybody know that? Let me pull that up and see. Okay. So I'm going to post that just in case it wasn't posted, because I want people that are on Facebook to go ahead and sign up for the group, because that's where I'm going to be sharing some graphics and some various forms and so forth. And here we go. I'll get this on there, and if you have not yet joined the group, please do so. And here we go. Get the link on there. Okay, so there's the group. Click the link and join our group, and I'm sure that there are going to be some great discussions. So here's the thing. If you go to the group, when you go to the Introduction to Biblical Hebrew group, you'll notice some tabs along the top. One of those tabs will say File. You can click that and you'll see every file, every document that I upload. You can print it on your personal computer. If you have an Office Depot close to you and you don't have a personal computer, you can go in the store and from your smart device, email it, and they can print it out for you. So I would encourage you to join that Facebook group for that reason. There are those who are not on Facebook. It's okay. We've got you covered. I'll take these, Jamie, you and 6 or 7 other humans, that we'll take those files and we'll put them on the website so that people can watch the video whether they're on Facebook or not. I actually do know that there are quite a few who are not on Facebook. So we want this to be available. Do this for me if you would. If you think that this is going to be beneficial, and I assure you that it will, especially after we go through 5 of these, if you can share this so that other people who are interested in learning the Hebrew alphabet and learning how to pronounce the letters and the vowel sounds and ultimately learning how to read in 5 weeks, please share it and let others know about it. Thank you for your time. I appreciate you coming and joining us, and I assure you that you will benefit greatly if you stick with us for 5 weeks. Again, watch the page because I'll be putting certain things out there to see if you're doing your work. And if you do your work, at the end of this, you'll receive a completion certificate as one who has completed the introductory course number 1 in Biblical Hebrew. Thanks a lot. We'll see you next week, next Thursday, 7 p.m. Central Standard Time, right here on Facebook.com/United Israel. Thanks for joining us.